The morning sun cast long shadows across the flight deck of the carrier Akagi, as Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stared at the horizon, unaware that he was about to lead the Imperial Japanese Navy into one of history's most devastating miscalculations. 6 months after Pearl Harbor had shocked the world into war, Japanese confidence soared like the zeros that dominated Pacific skies. Yet beneath this veneer of invincibility lay the seeds of a catastrophic misjudgment that would reshape the entire course of World War II. In the war rooms of Tokyo, Japan's military leaders had convinced themselves that one decisive blow against the American Pacific Fleet would force the United States to negotiate peace. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, now orchestrated an even more ambitious gambit. The target, Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of coral and sand sitting like a strategic cork in the Pacific bottle, 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. From Japanese intelligence reports, Midway appeared lightly defended, its small garrison no match for the combined might of 4 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, and over 150 supporting vessels. The first miscalculation had already taken root in the planning stages. Japanese strategists assumed American morale remained shattered from Pearl Harbor's surprise assault. Their Pacific commanders, still reeling from months of defeats across the Philippines, Dutch East Indies, and countless Pacific islands, they believed Admiral Chester Nimitz's forces would react predictably, sending their remaining carriers north toward the Aleutians, where a diversionary attack would unfold simultaneously. This assumption proved spectacularly wrong. What the Japanese high command failed to grasp was the transformation occurring within American naval intelligence. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team of cryptographers at Station Hypo in Hawaii had penetrated deep into Japanese naval codes, intercepting and decoding communications that revealed not just Midway as the primary target, but the timing, composition, and tactical approach of the entire operation. Where Japanese planners saw surprise, Americans saw transparency. The terrain miscalculation proved equally critical. Japanese naval doctrine, honed through victories against larger but less coordinated forces, emphasized concentrated firepower and decisive engagement. However, Midway's position offered unique advantages to defenders who understood its strategic geometry. The atoll's airstrip provided an unsinkable aircraft carrier, while its position allowed American forces to operate from multiple directions, complicating Japanese coordination between their scattered task forces. Historical context drawn from Walter Lord's Incredible Victory and Samuel Eliot Morrison's official naval histories, Admiral Nagumo, veteran of Pearl Harbor's triumph, carried the weight of expectations as his first air fleet steamed toward what Japanese planners confidently predicted would be another overwhelming victory. His 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, had dominated every engagement since the war began, their experienced pilots having cut through American and Allied defenses like katanas through silk. Yet confidence bred complacency, and complacency bred the kind of tactical rigidity that would prove fatal when facing an enemy no longer caught off guard. The Japanese plan called for a dawn attack on Midway's installations, followed by a surface bombardment that would soften remaining defenses before invasion forces landed. Simple, direct, and historically effective. What could possibly go wrong with such overwhelming force concentrated against such a small target? Everything, as the next 48 hours would demonstrate with brutal clarity. While Japanese admirals studied charts and weather patterns, Commander Joseph Rochefort hunched over decoded intercepts in the basement of Pearl Harbor's intelligence center, piecing together enemy intentions with the methodical precision of a master puzzle solver. The breakthrough had come weeks earlier when Japanese communications referenced target AF with increasing frequency. Rochefort's team suspected AF meant Midway, but Admiral Nimitz demanded certainty before committing his outnumbered Pacific Fleet to what might prove a fatal trap. The verification gambit was ingenious in its simplicity. Midway's garrison received orders to transmit an uncoded message reporting their water purification system had broken down, creating a freshwater shortage. Within hours, Japanese radio intercepts reported that AF was experiencing water supply problems. The trap was confirmed, and American preparations shifted into overdrive. Admiral Nimitz faced a staggering numerical disadvantage. His entire Pacific fleet comprised just 3 operational aircraft carriers: Enterprise, Hornet, and the battle-damaged Yorktown, hastily repaired in Pearl Harbor's dry docks after limping home from the Coral Sea engagement. Against this modest force, Japanese intelligence counted 4 heavy carriers, 2 light carriers, 7 battleships, 15 cruisers, and 42 destroyers, plus invasion transports carrying 5,000 troops. Any rational analysis suggested American defeat was inevitable. Yet Nimitz understood something his Japanese counterparts had missed. Battles are won by information, timing, and tactical flexibility, not merely by counting ships. The code-breaking advantage meant American forces could position themselves advantageously before Japanese scouts detected their presence. More importantly, it allowed Nimitz to concentrate his limited strength at the decisive point, while Japanese forces remained scattered across multiple objectives. The timing element proved crucial to American planning. Japanese doctrine called for dawn attacks, taking advantage of rising sun glare that would handicap defending fighters. However, advanced knowledge allowed American commanders to position their forces for maximum advantage during those critical morning hours, when Japanese air groups would be most vulnerable during launch and recovery operations. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Task Force 16 from the Enterprise, embodied the calculated aggression Nimitz demanded. Unlike some of his more cautious contemporaries, Spruance understood that outnumbered forces must take tactical risks to achieve strategic surprise. His plan called for launching every available aircraft at maximum range, accepting the risk that some pilots might not have enough fuel to return to their carriers. Better to strike with everything available than preserve aircraft for a battle that might never come. The terrain advantages became clearer as American forces approached Midway's vicinity. The atoll's position allowed defending aircraft to operate from a fixed base, while carrier-based planes provided additional striking power from multiple directions. Japanese forces, concentrated in their traditional battle formation, would find themselves surrounded by threats they had not adequately prepared to counter simultaneously. Strategic analysis based on Gordon Pranga's Miracle at Midway and primary source documents from the Naval War College. Yorktown's participation added another dimension to American preparations. Technically unfit for combat operations after Coral Sea battle damage, the carrier had undergone round-the-clock repairs that transformed Pearl Harbor into a showcase of American industrial determination. Welders worked in shifts, cutting away damaged sections and installing new steel plating while supplies and ammunition were loaded aboard. In 72 hours, what should have required months of shipyard work was completed through sheer determination and innovative engineering. By June 3, 1942, American forces had achieved something their Japanese opponents thought impossible: strategic surprise despite numerical inferiority. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether Japan's Pacific expansion would continue or begin its irreversible decline. The pre-dawn darkness of June 4, 1942, concealed the most critical hours in Pacific naval warfare as both fleets maneuvered toward their destiny. Aboard the Japanese flagship Akagi, Admiral Nagumo reviewed final preparations with the confidence of a commander who had never tasted defeat. His 4 carriers had launched successful strikes across the Pacific for 6 months, their experienced air crews having perfected the deadly choreography of carrier warfare through constant practice and combat experience. At 0430 hours, Nagumo's first wave of 108 aircraft lifted off into the Pacific dawn, bound for Midway Atoll. Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga led the mixed formation of dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters with orders to neutralize the American base's defensive capabilities in preparation for the invasion fleet's arrival. Intelligence reports suggested minimal opposition, perhaps 20 American aircraft and a few hundred Marines defending installations that could be quickly overwhelmed. The Japanese formation approached Midway at 0620, encountering far heavier resistance than anticipated. American Marine Fighter Squadron 221, flying obsolete Brewster Buffaloes and Grumman Wildcats, threw themselves against the superior Zeros with desperate courage. Though outmatched in equipment and numbers, the Marine pilots disrupted Japanese attack formations and forced modifications to the planned bombing runs. Captain Richard Fleming's dive bomber squadron, added to Japanese confusion by attacking the carriers themselves rather than waiting defensively over Midway. Though Fleming's obsolete aircraft achieved no significant damage against the heavily defended Japanese fleet, their appearance forced Nagumo to maintain combat air patrol over his carriers, reducing the number of fighters available to escort. Bombing missions. The first tactical miscalculation became apparent as Tomonaga's aircraft returned from their Midway strike. The lieutenant reported that a second attack would be necessary to completely neutralize the American base's airfield and remaining defensive positions. This recommendation created the first critical decision point that would cascade into disaster for Japanese forces. Nagumo faced a dilemma that exposed fundamental flaws in Japanese tactical doctrine. His second aircraft wave remained on deck, armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs for use against American warships that reconnaissance flights had not yet located. Converting these aircraft for a second Midway strike required rearming with high-explosive bombs and incendiary weapons, a time-consuming process that would leave his carriers vulnerable during the changeover. Tactical details sourced from Mitsuo, Fuchida's Midway, The Battle That Doomed Japan, and official U.S. Navy combat narratives. At 07:15, Nagumo made the fatal decision to rearm his second wave for ground attack missions. Torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs were struck below to the magazines while high-explosive ordnance was brought up to the hangar decks. Fuel lines were disconnected and reconnected, arming mechanisms were adjusted, and flight deck crews began the complex ballet of preparing over 90 aircraft for a different type of mission entirely. The process had barely begun when Japanese reconnaissance finally located American naval forces. At 07:28, a search plane from the cruiser Tone reported sighting 10 enemy surface ships, approximately 200 miles northeast of Midway. The report lacked crucial details about ship types and aircraft carrier presence, but its implications sent shockwaves through Nagumo's command structure. American warships in the area meant the tactical situation had fundamentally changed. If aircraft carriers were among those 10 ships, Japanese forces faced a coordinated two-front engagement they had not adequately prepared for. The rearming process, already underway, would need to be reversed, with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs brought back to flight decks while high-explosive weapons returned to storage. Time was running out, and Japanese efficiency was about to be tested in ways no peacetime exercise had ever contemplated. The dawn of June 4th had revealed the first major Japanese miscalculation, underestimating American defensive preparations and tactical coordination. As the morning progressed, these initial errors would compound into a cascade of tactical disasters that would reshape the Pacific War's entire trajectory. The morning sun climbed higher as Admiral Nagumo wrestled with decisions that would determine the fate of the Imperial Japanese Navy. His 4 aircraft carriers presented a scene of barely controlled chaos as ordnance crews struggled to reverse the rearming process begun just minutes earlier. Torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs emerged from magazine storage while high-explosive weapons were struck below, creating a deadly bottleneck on hangar decks never designed for such rapid tactical changes. At 08:30, the reconnaissance report from Tone's search plane was updated with devastating clarity. Enemy force accompanied by what appears to be aircraft carrier. The words struck Japanese commanders like physical blows, confirming their worst tactical nightmare. American naval forces were not only present, but included the carrier strength necessary to mount coordinated attacks while Japanese aircraft were scattered between Midway strikes and defensive patrols. Admiral Spruance, commanding the American task force from Enterprise, had positioned his carriers exactly where code-breaking intelligence suggested they would achieve maximum tactical advantage. At 07:02, American dive bombers and torpedo planes had begun launching from Enterprise and Hornet. Their pilots briefed on Japanese positions with accuracy that seemed impossible to enemy commanders who still believed their operations remained secret. The first American attack wave, led by Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay's torpedo squadron, approached Japanese carriers at 09:30 in what appeared to be a suicidal frontal assault. Flying obsolete Douglas Devastator aircraft that were both slow and lightly armed, Lindsay's 15 planes pressed their attack against overwhelming defensive fire from Japanese combat air patrol fighters and anti-aircraft gunners. The slaughter was methodical and complete. 0 fighters, freed from escort duties by the absence of American fighter cover, systematically destroyed every American torpedo plane in a display of aerial combat that demonstrated Japanese tactical superiority at its peak. Lindsay and his entire squadron perished without scoring a single torpedo hit, their sacrifice apparently meaningless in the larger context of the engagement. Yet the sacrifice created the tactical opening that American planners had desperately needed. Japanese fighters, having descended to wave-top level to massacre the torpedo bombers, found themselves out of position when Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's dive bomber squadron arrived over the Japanese carriers at precisely 0:10:24. The sky above Nagumo's fleet was virtually empty of defensive fighters, presenting McCluskey with the kind of tactical opportunity that occurs perhaps once in an entire war. Combat details compiled from pilot debriefings archived at the Naval Historical Center and Samuel Eliot Morrison's comprehensive battle analysis. The sight that greeted McCluskey's dive bombers represented every naval aviator's perfect attack scenario. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers steamed in formation below, their flight decks crowded with fueled and armed aircraft, fuel lines connected, ordnance stacked in the open, and virtually no air cover overhead. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu presented themselves as targets so perfect they seemed almost arranged for American convenience. At 0:10:26, McCluskey rolled his dauntless dive bomber into its attack dive, followed by 36 additional aircraft that would deliver the most devastating 6 minutes in naval aviation history. The first bomb struck Akagi near the aircraft elevator, detonating among the rearmed torpedo planes and creating a chain reaction of secondary explosions that transformed the flagship into a floating inferno within moments. Simultaneously, Lieutenant Commander Richard Best's squadron attacked Akagi, while Lieutenant Commander Earl Gallagher's bombers dove on Kaga. The Japanese carriers, caught with their most vulnerable loads topside and their defenses positioned incorrectly, absorbed devastating damage that would prove impossible to control or contain. The timing miscalculation that Japanese planners had dismissed as insignificant now revealed its catastrophic consequences. Caught between missions, with ordnance exposed and fuel systems active, the Japanese carriers had become floating ammunition dumps, just as American dive bombers achieved complete tactical surprise. The battle's decisive moment lasted 6 minutes, but its consequences would echo across the remainder of World War II. The scene aboard the Japanese carriers defied every principle of damage control and naval survival, as secondary explosions transformed proud warships into floating crematoriums. Admiral Nagumo, thrown to the deck of Akagi's bridge by the concussion of direct bomb hits, struggled to comprehend how 6 months of uninterrupted victory had dissolved into catastrophe in less than 6 minutes of American dive bombing. Akagi's flight deck erupted in a series of explosions as aviation fuel and armed ordnance created an unstoppable chain reaction. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, leader of the Pearl Harbor attack and now trapped aboard the burning flagship, later described the scene as hell itself unleashed upon the water. Fuel fires spread rapidly through ventilation systems while secondary explosions from torpedo warheads turned the hangar deck into a blast furnace that made rescue operations impossible. Captain Tomeo Kaku of Hiryu, the sole surviving Japanese carrier, maintained his composure despite witnessing the destruction of 3/4 of his nation's mobile striking power in minutes. His immediate response demonstrated the tactical flexibility that Japanese naval doctrine had always emphasized. Concentrate remaining strength and strike back with maximum force before the enemy could consolidate their advantage. At 1100 hours, Hiryu launched 18 dive bombers and 6 fighters under Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi, targeting the American carrier Yorktown. The Japanese pilots, among the most experienced in the Imperial Navy, navigated directly to their target despite heavy combat air patrol resistance. Their attack demonstrated that Japanese tactical excellence remained formidable even in the face of strategic disaster. Yorktown, still bearing battle damage from the Coral Sea engagement, absorbed 3 direct bomb hits that penetrated her flight deck and started fires in the hangar spaces below. Captain Elliot Buckmaster ordered damage control teams into action, but the accumulated damage from 2 major engagements had pushed the veteran carrier beyond her operational limits. At 1400 hours, Buckmaster gave the order to abandon ship, believing Yorktown was doomed. The American response came with mechanical precision that reflected months of intensive training and tactical preparation. Enterprise and Hornet, undamaged by Japanese attacks, immediately prepared counterstrikes against Hiryu, while damage control teams aboard Yorktown fought desperately to save their ship. The contrast between American damage control efficiency and the uncontrolled fires consuming Japanese carriers highlighted fundamental differences in naval doctrine and training. Damage control procedures and tactical analysis drawn from Norman, Polmar's aircraft carriers and official Navy Department battle damage reports. At 1500 hours, American dive bombers from Enterprise located Hiryu and delivered the attack that completed Japanese carrier aviation's destruction. Lieutenant Commander Earl Gallagher, veteran of the morning's devastation, led 24 dauntless bombers in a textbook attack that left the final Japanese carrier burning as fiercely as her 3 sister ships. The tactical situation had reversed, completely within 8 hours. American forces, outnumbered and outgunned at dawn, now controlled the Central Pacific while Japanese survivors struggled to save what remained of their fleet. Admiral Yamamoto, monitoring the battle from his flagship Yamato 300 miles away, received damage reports that made continuing the Midway operation impossible. Captain Kaku, mortally wounded but still commanding Hiryu's damage control efforts, demonstrated the kind of personal courage that had made the Imperial Japanese Navy formidable throughout the early war period. Rather than abandon his burning ship, he remained on the bridge directing firefighting efforts until flames finally forced the crew's evacuation. His final radio message to Admiral Yamamoto was characteristically understated. Hiryu is no longer operational. The human cost of Japanese tactical miscalculations became clear as rescue operations began. Experienced pilots who had dominated Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor perished in the flames of their carriers, taking with them years of combat experience that could not be quickly replaced. Aircraft that had represented the pinnacle of Japanese naval aviation technology became twisted wreckage on the ocean floor, their loss marking the beginning of Japan's technological disadvantage in the Pacific War. By sunset on June 4th, the strategic balance in the Pacific had shifted permanently. Japanese naval aviation, which had seemed invincible that morning, was reduced to scattered survivors clinging to life rafts, while American forces controlled both the tactical situation and the operational initiative for the first time since Pearl Harbor. As the sun set on June 4, 1942, the full magnitude of Japanese miscalculations became apparent through the smoke and debris scattered across hundreds of square miles of Pacific Ocean. 4 aircraft carriers that had dominated every engagement since Pearl Harbor were either sinking or abandoned, their destruction representing not merely tactical defeat, but the collapse of Japan's entire strategic position in the Pacific War. Admiral Yamamoto, receiving damage reports aboard his flagship Yamato, faced the unthinkable reality that his carefully orchestrated masterstroke had instead delivered Japan's naval aviation into the hands of a numerically inferior but tactically superior enemy force. The decision to proceed with the Midway operation despite growing intelligence uncertainties now appeared as the kind of strategic blunder that changes the course of entire wars. The human cost extended far beyond ships and aircraft into the realm of irreplaceable expertise. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, survived Akagi's destruction but sustained injuries that would remove him from active combat operations. Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, leader of the morning's Midway strike, perished in the afternoon attack on Yorktown, taking with him tactical knowledge accumulated through months of successful operations across the Pacific. Captain Elliot Buckmaster's decision to abandon Yorktown proved premature, as damage control teams working through the night of June 4th managed to restore power and reduce flooding sufficiently to attempt salvage operations. The carrier's survival, though temporary, demonstrated American damage control capabilities that far exceeded Japanese expectations and revealed another critical miscalculation in Japanese tactical planning. The terrain advantages that Japanese planners had dismissed as insignificant proved decisive in ways that extended beyond the immediate battle. Midway's airstrip remained operational throughout the engagement, allowing land-based aircraft to maintain continuous pressure on Japanese forces while serving as a navigation beacon for returning American carrier aircraft. The atoll's position also prevented Japanese escape routes that might have preserved some carrier strength for future operations. Admiral Spruance's tactical decisions during June 5th demonstrated the aggressive flexibility that American naval doctrine had developed through painful early war experience. Rather than pursuing damaged Japanese surface ships that were withdrawing toward home waters, he concentrated on consolidating American control over the Central Pacific while avoiding the kind of night surface engagement where Japanese forces retained significant advantages. Strategic analysis compiled from Clay Blair's Silent Victory and official Joint Chiefs of Staff post-battle assessments. The broader implications of Japanese miscalculations extended into every aspect of Pacific War planning. Japanese industrial capacity, already strained by simultaneous operations across multiple theaters, could not quickly replace 4 fleet carriers and their experienced air groups. American industrial mobilization, meanwhile, was approaching peak efficiency with new Essex-class carriers under construction and pilot training programs expanding rapidly. Emperor Hirohito's reaction to the Midway disaster, though carefully concealed from the Japanese public, reflected the imperial leadership's growing recognition that the war's trajectory had fundamentally changed. The strategic initiative that Japan had maintained since Pearl Harbor was irretrievably lost, replaced by a defensive posture that would characterize Japanese operations for the remainder of the conflict. The intelligence miscalculation proved most costly in its long-term implications. Japanese naval codes, compromised but not yet replaced, continued providing American cryptographers with insights into enemy planning that would prove invaluable in subsequent operations. The assumption that American morale remained shattered after early defeats was replaced by grudging respect for an enemy that had demonstrated both tactical competence and strategic patience. By June 6th, as Japanese survivors limped toward home waters, the magnitude of their leaders' miscalculations had reshaped the entire Pacific War. What began as Japan's masterstroke to force American peace negotiations had instead provided the United States with the decisive victory needed to begin the long campaign that would ultimately reach Japan's home islands themselves. The morning of June 7, 1942, found the Pacific Ocean fundamentally changed from the body of water that had witnessed Pearl Harbor's surprise attack 6 months earlier. Japanese naval supremacy, seemingly unshakable after months of victories, had been shattered by a combination of tactical miscalculations and strategic assumptions that proved catastrophically wrong when tested against a prepared and determined enemy. Admiral Nimitz's post-battle analysis, transmitted to Washington in carefully measured language, nevertheless conveyed the magnitude of American achievement against overwhelming odds. The destruction of 4 Japanese aircraft carriers represented not merely a tactical victory, but a strategic transformation that would influence every subsequent operation in the Pacific theater. American forces had demonstrated that numerical superiority could be overcome through superior intelligence, tactical flexibility, and precise timing. The Japanese High Command's attempts to conceal the extent of their Midway losses from both the public and military leadership created a cascade of strategic problems that would plague their war effort throughout the remaining conflict. Replacement pilots, trained under wartime conditions rather than the rigorous peacetime standards that had produced the original carrier air groups, never achieved the same level of tactical excellence that had made Japanese naval aviation seemingly invincible. Emperor Hirohito's private meetings with military advisors during the weeks following Midway revealed the imperial leadership's growing recognition that Japan's strategic position had become untenable. The assumption that American industrial capacity could not quickly replace Pacific Fleet losses proved incorrect, as new construction accelerated beyond Japanese planners' most pessimistic projections. The terrain miscalculation that had dismissed Midway's strategic value became apparent as American forces used the atoll as a forward base for subsequent operations against Japanese positions throughout the Central Pacific. The airstrip that Japanese planners had viewed as easily neutralized instead became a staging area for bomber attacks that extended American striking power deep into Japanese-controlled territory. Post-battle strategic assessments drawn from Ernest King's official reports and transcripts of Imperial General Headquarters meetings translated during the occupation period Admiral Yamamoto's personal response to the Midway disaster reflected the complex psychology of a commander who understood both the tactical brilliance of American performance and the strategic implications for Japan's ultimate defeat. His subsequent planning focused increasingly on defensive operations designed to extract maximum cost from American advances, rather than seeking the decisive battle that had been the cornerstone of Japanese naval doctrine. The timing miscalculation that had assumed American forces would react predictably to Japanese initiatives was replaced by grudging recognition that enemy commanders had achieved tactical surprise through superior intelligence and strategic patience. Future Japanese operations would be planned with the assumption that American forces possessed detailed knowledge of enemy intentions, fundamentally changing the nature of Pacific warfare. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's navigation decision that led American dive bombers to the Japanese carriers at their most vulnerable moment became a case study in tactical excellence that influenced American naval aviation training throughout the war. The 6 minutes that destroyed 3 aircraft carriers demonstrated how tactical preparation and strategic intelligence could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The human cost of Japanese miscalculations extended far beyond the immediate battle. Casualties into the realm of national morale and strategic confidence. The Imperial Japanese Navy, which had not suffered a major defeat since the Russo-Japanese War, was forced to acknowledge that American forces had achieved tactical and strategic superiority despite facing overwhelming numerical disadvantages. By war's end, military historians would identify the Midway engagement as the turning point where Japanese expansion reached its maximum extent and began the long retreat toward the home islands. The miscalculations of timing, terrain, and American tenacity that had seemed minor factors in pre-battle planning proved decisive in ways that reshaped the entire Pacific conflict. The legacy of Admiral Nagumo's confident dawn approach to Midway atoll serves as an enduring reminder that in warfare, as in life, overconfidence breeds the kind of tactical rigidity that transforms certain victory into catastrophic defeat. Japan's leaders had miscalculated more than timing, terrain, and tenacity. They had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the enemy they faced and the price of underestimating American resolve when finally put to the test.